Hey guys, Panda here. Today I've actually got something that's quite intriguing actually. It's Sunless Sea, a game by an oddly appropriately named developer, Fail Better Games. Now I say oddly appropriate as this game is a rogue-like, i.e. you'll be dying quite a lot. While this isn't very special in and of itself, what makes it different from other roguelike games is the fact that you're the captain of a ship. Thus, you'll be fighting the elements, the seas, mysterious events, as well as your dwindling supplies, in addition to the multitude of enemies that you would normally fight in a roguelike game. Now, with all this being set around the time of the Industrial Revolution, it'll have you exploring an underground sea, trying to make ends meet as you strive to achieve one of your predetermined life goals. While a simple enough premise, Sunless Sea does mix things up with some very Lovecraftian themes, with mystery being a big part of the game. Now, I've actually thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, thus normally I would recommend for you guys to just go out and buy it right here and now. However, this is not normally, as this game is quite polarizing in some aspects, i.e. some features will completely turn some of you off, while others might be able to get over it and find a little gem of a game to enjoy. Thus, hopefully I can show the latter of you guys an interesting little experience to be had, and the former, well, at least something you might have a passing interest in. Thus, without any further ado, let us begin the video then, shall we? So Sunless Sea is set in what they call the Neath, a huge continent-sized cavern located miles below the Earth's surface. Things are strange there. Time and space act differently, people rarely die, truths and knowledge are traded like currency, and even one's soul can be traded in for short-term profit. These are but a few examples of how the extraordinary has become mundane in the world of Sunless Sea. And unfortunately, saying anything more of the lore would spoil much of the discovery in the game, as it has been a genuinely interesting part of the experience for me, finding out more about all the gods, the different factions, the histories, and the general themes of the game. It helps that everything is very, again, Lovecraftian and mysterious, leaving you in a constant state of wonder, trying to form explanations for things in-game that are unexplained and mysterious. Which is great and all, until you realise at the end of the game that the game has barely bloody explained any of it to you. I've trolled through forums and Wikipedias, and it's all left me wanting to know more about the story, which, as you can imagine, left me feeling very unsatisfied once the sense of wonder had rubbed off. It does speak very greatly for the actual lore that's already there, that I want to know more and I'm not satisfied for what little they've given me. However, again, it's not very satisfying when you are very interested in something but you're not given everything you want to know. Now, one of the more satisfying features of Sunless Sea is that it consists of what I like to call micro-stories, i.e. small storylines that are self-contained. You'll see what I mean by micro-stories when you play, as while the greater overarching story for your character isn't exactly very well fleshed out, every port and every character you talk with or interact with has a small story to it. Very small, sometimes not even leading into any obvious quests, but still stories nonetheless, and these make up the bulk of the world building and exploration that are in the game, and act as, well, cookie crumbs, keeping you on the ever-winding trail this game sets out for you. If you come across an island with a giant zeppelin on it, there's a story to discover there. Spot an island made out of old ships, there's a story behind it. Even a weird old island that's only main feature being a post office has its own story and unique quirk to it. And this is ultimately what drives the exploration aspect to the game, and is genuinely very satisfying to actually explore. And heck, even many islands need return visits to unlock much of their story, which will keep you going after you've explored much of the map. Overall though, the story and lore is kind of like a giant murky puddle, in that there's a lot of potential for you to get lost in its unseeable depths, but you might find yourself in places where the water barely wets the ground, i.e. the lack of true closure with some of its lore and story. Nonetheless, you'll have a lot of fun stomping through it if you like anything Lovecraftian at all, and I can't honestly recommend the story enough to you. Even though it does have some negatives to it, the micro-story aspect really does put this game a notch or two ahead of most indie games that I've actually played. Now, visuals and sound are some of the most standout features of the game, as both the music and the graphics are really top-notch in how they deliver the themes of the game. While there's not much to say about the mostly black and white graphics, though they do have some colour to it, it's not really an interesting colour palette there. They still convey the feeling, however, of where you are and the situation at hand quite nicely. Now, the soundtrack. Oh man, is the soundtrack just gorgeous. I mean, you probably would have already figured that out by now, since I've been playing the soundtrack thus far anyways. But still, me personally, I'm not a music head. I'm not a person that gets into many songs and bands and such, but Sunless Sea just has a soundtrack that just fits, you know? It builds upon the themes and the lore and the premise of the world just so perfectly, and it gives them form in your ears. It's absolutely astounding how they can just, well, evoke feelings of where you are, even when some of the, well, visuals and text interactions, I'll get into that in a minute, don't really hammer home the themes of the game as well as the soundtrack does. Even songs that are slightly upbeat, for example, can have these darker tones playing, as if reminding you that even when you're doing well or you're on your way back to your home waters, that tragedy is still there, waiting in the wings to screw you over if you're not careful. So, something has to be said as to how desolate the game is now, as at times, you'll often be plodding around in total darkness with only a ship, its engine sounds, and occasional water drips to keep you company. While this is very thematic for the lore and the world itself, evoking feelings of loneliness and despair, it bores you after a while, unfortunately, as when you've got nothing else for your eyes to look at but the same ship you've been looking at for the past 10, 20, 30 hours, it's not exactly visually stimulating. While, yeah, you could argue that it's, well, again, very thematic for the world, thus you could excuse it for that, something extra for you to look at every now and then would go a long way, in my opinion, to actually making the game a bit more interesting to play. So in general though, the visual and sound design is quite excellent, despite me ragging on about how desolate the game can be in terms of visual and sometimes occasionally in terms of its sound design. It's still quite perfect in how it represents its theming and its world that it has created. I really haven't seen any problems here with anything. There have been no problems I've had. There's been no graphical glitches. There's been no problems with its quality. It's all been rather top notch. So in general, visuals and sound, great. So now we must talk about the gameplay, and unfortunately it is a bit of a polarizing aspect of this game, and there's no two ways about it, unfortunately. The game itself is really slow-paced, which is one of its polarizing factors. And unfortunately it is ridiculously slow-paced, as at times you can just easily watch Netflix on a separate monitor while playing, as at times you're just sailing in a straight line for minutes at a time. The game's death mechanic even will have you starting over and over to progress, acquiring heirlooms and added bonuses to make the game easier on successive lives. Thus, if you don't like the phrase slow and steady wins the race, then you sure as hell won't like the gameplay here. That being said, do you love exploration? Because this game's got exploration. In fact, the game's freeform discovery of the world makes up 70% of the enjoyment you get out of the game, which will keep you entertained for hours upon hours upon hours. I'm currently 26 hours in myself, and I'm not even close to completing my goals yet, so there's a lot of value for you lovers of exploration. That being said though, this is a wiki game through and through, as you'll be needing to look through cargo and quest and information up on Wikipedias often, as unfortunately the explanations as to what most non-equipment is used for is incredibly vague. It's almost impossible to figure out how to acquire certain items by yourself without going through trial and error on multiple lives, which could be considered exploration, but since you end up doing many of the same tasks over and over every time you die and start over, that aspect of exploration gets old fast in that regard, making it more of a monotonous task rather than an always exciting adventure of discovery. The stories themselves and what make up 50% of the gameplay / exploration is done in text interactions. Yeah, this is a game with no voice acting, meaning you'll be reading every dialogue and effect in the world, to which there are thousands. Honestly, for me this wasn't that big of a flaw, as though at times you could skim read through some texts, I was still interested to learn and read regardless of that fact. Although, if you were the sort that dreaded how World of Warcraft did their questing / dialogue and just skip through most of it, then unfortunately this isn't the game for you, as you'll be missing out on much of the game's excellent, if again, a bit unsatisfyingly finished story and lore. Okay, so the combat needs to be talked about. You would have seen a bit of the combat in some of the footage that I've had up here. But, again, it does need to be said in full, in that the combat just, well, bluntly, it fucking sucks. There's no two ways about it. What it amounts to, ultimately, is you and an enemy literally going in circles around each other, keeping out the enemy's firing arcs while keeping him in yours. I wish I could say anything more about it than that, but that's genuinely it. You just end up sticking the nose of your ship up the enemy ship's ass until the enemy ship keels over and dies. Even monsters aren't that much to speak of. Most just run straight at your ship with no thought behind their attacks. Even the loot you get from enemies isn't worth more than the fuel / hull you wasted fighting them instead of visiting ports, meaning you'll be ending up running from every fight instead of engaging. The only other thing that I could think about mentioning in terms of the gameplay is the fact that it's grindy. I know I've mentioned this before, but I feel like it needs to be said in full right now, as unfortunately, when you die, you have to start every single quest you did over. Of course, some rewards persist between lives, such as some extra stat bonuses you might have acquired, or maps, or whatever it is you took with you when you died. It's still going to have you end up doing those quests and tasks again when you die, because unfortunately there's some quests that are just plain out necessary for you to do every time you come back. There's a particular quest that's carrying Sphinx Stone from a mining site all the way back to your home port in London that you will end up doing every time you die, because it's such a lucrative business. You earn thousands upon thousands of echoes, which is the currency in the game, every time you do the quest. And it does really wear down on you after a while. It quite honestly does. It does detract a bit from the story as well, as you do again, end up doing story quests over and over every time we visit a port, because the story quests do give you bonuses of some kinds. I just really wish it didn't detract from the overall story experience, but I can't deny that it doesn't. Or can't deny that it does, I should say. In summary though, if you're willing to get past these more negative aspects of the game, which can be a big turn-off for some people, then you will find something that is still very enjoyable to explore and to delve deep into. For those of you that can't get past those negative aspects and the actual lore and the premise of the world doesn't just grab you, then I don't know what else to say. This might not be the game for you, unfortunately. So, to summarise this video, if you like the idea of a Lovecraftian, spooky, scary world that's actually quite brutal at times, then this game might be something you'd want to pick up. The themes and interesting world alone make for a unique experience, let alone the actual seafaring aspects. It's probably not for those of you wanting something more action-packed, as, again, the game is quite slow and the combat is horrendously simplistic. I can't honestly recommend it full price to those of you that are interested in it though, as for me the many elements that are unsatisfying really brought the experience down for me. Still, however, it is a noteworthy game you should probably put on your Steam wishlist for the next big sale. If they do fix these issues they have with the game, however, I would heartily recommend the game full price for you, since it's about $20 on Steam, I think, at the moment. So it's not that much, but a bit too much for what I'm willing to pay for this experience. If you like the idea of being a ship's captain, however, and you didn't exactly like the other aspects that I described, then I would recommend you guys to check out Windward. It's a quite small and simple game that I might do in the near future that basically has all the aspects you would expect of being a seafaring captain. You got trading, you got combat, you got big ship-on-ship battles. It's something you might actually be very interested in. However, if you enjoyed the bleak atmosphere and strong sense of hopelessness in Sunless Sea, then you might want to check out this War of Mine, which is a really amazing look at civilians' life caught in the middle of a war, trying to scrape out a living in a war-torn city. That game honestly brought so many feels to me and feels to many other people. So if you're the sort of person that likes feeling, that might be the sort of game for you. Anyways, if you found this recommendation appealing to you, stay tuned for my video for beginners, as this game can be quite daunting to actually get started in, which should be up in a day or two from now. Otherwise, I would like to thank you all for watching. If you could leave comments, likes, or even subscriptions as a token of thanks, that would be just lovely. And I wish you all to have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.